You're listening to Sonia Poulton on today's News Talk, TNT.
And of course, as always, you out there have plenty to say about what is going on today. Melissa says, I feel we are fooled into thinking that we live in a democracy in its true original meaning. On the flip side, we are fooled into thinking anarchy is chaos, decentralization is desperately needed. We all want to live in peace, says Melissa. And she does some praying hands there. I hear you, Melissa, loud and clear. That's all we want, really, isn't it? Peace and good food and a roof over our head. Basic stuff. Basic stuff. Now, joining me for a roundup of some of the day's biggest stories is Andrew Eborn, political commentator. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning. And can I say what brilliant audience you have? They always come up with a really wise word. So, yes, all we need is peace. I think that's absolutely right. And a good meal occasionally.
Yes, a good meal, peace, love. You know, we humans are very, very basic. That is the truth. We don't need lots on top. Well, I certainly don't. I'm a simple girl at heart. That's a whole other story for a whole other time, Andre. So, Tories losing Blackpool South by-election, lost around half council seats so far. How bad has this been for Rishi Sunak?
Oh, it's been absolutely devastating. It has all of the elements of a Shakespearean play, doesn't it? I mean, the worst result in 40 years is what they're looking at. And just like most Shakespearean plays, they've got glorious characters in the background about who's going to replace Rishi, or is it going to force all this election and so on and so forth. So it's been a devastating result in Blackpool. What's been remarkable as well is the rise of reform, and in just a few points behind them on certain councils as the results keep flooding in. So it's certainly one to watch for Richard Tice and his team.
Well, now here's the thing, what I find very interesting, because reform, obviously they're not able to put up people all across the country, but they're clearly making some strides, and certainly the media love reform, right?
Oh, no, absolutely. And I know lots of the key characters. I've been shared many a studio with them on many an interesting time. And they could really be the kingmakers in this. And when you're talking about some of the polls, previously we're talking about the Conservatives getting less than 100 seats. That was one predictions. And they were saying that reform might get 50. So you look at that sort of basis about whether they could indeed be the kingmakers, but you've got to ask yourself why. And what the reason is you're sort of turning around, they're putting themselves as the alternatives, if you like, to the Tories, where there's that sort of disappointment in the various things which are happening. So it's very interesting on that sort of basis. And they've got some glorious characters there as well. Politics is about characters. And just as we might just put everything in perspective, you remember that Boris, not so many years ago, he got an 80 seat majority for the Tories. Everybody heralded this as a wonderful time for the Tories, one of the best election results in a long time. And at that stage, Boris was the Carlsberg of politicians. He could reach parts of the electorate that other politicians couldn't reach. He's now turned into this sort of Marmite character where you either love or you hate him. But I think the Tories going from such a massive swing, you look at the statistics, they are really quite alarming.
Do you think that the vultures are now going to be circling around Rishi? Do you think they're going to be looking to oust him?
Oh, I think the vultures have been circulating for a long time.
Haven't they? Yes.
What happens in politics, you know? I always say that history repeats itself because we don't learn the lessons from history. And everybody always it sort of follows a pattern, doesn't it? We go in, we elect people with hope on the basis of the promises that they do. We give them a few years to do it, and then we get disappointed because they haven't delivered. And then we swing the other way in the hope that the new bunch or the alternative bunch might be able to help. But certainly I think Rishi is in difficult grounds at the moment. He still has his 5 pledges, and he's desperately hanging on that there might be some sort of wins, if you like, on that sort of basis. But it's certainly looking like a bloodbath today for him, and certainly discussions will be happening behind the scenes.
Of course, Penny Mourdant, of course, has long been a sort of front runner to replace Rishi Sunak. But she said, and I'm going to quote her here, she's not prepared to be installed in Downing Street like an old boiler, which is really interesting because she's so ambitious. I think we all know she wants to be PM. What are your thoughts?
Well, I love the fight. It's better to be a new boiler than an old one, I think, is the reality, as the phrase used to be. But she has a glorious turn of phrase, Penny, and she did really well. You might remember at the coronation, she held that glorious sword for that lengthy time. Do you remember that glorious thing? And she used to be a magician's assistant and a member of the Magic Circle here in London many years ago. So she could certainly do with a little bit of magic for the Conservatives at the moment. But she sort of talks about, they were talking about sort of the Pims with Penny. She says she's more of a pints with Penny sort of person. But behind the scenes, like they always do, they sort of turn around and say, no, we support our leader. So it'd be very interesting. But certainly there's some very interesting characters. I think Kemi is another very interesting character as well. You've got Grant Shapps having snaps with Shapps, I think he's saying to people. So they're all behind the scenes currying support for who might be the next leader, assuming that Rishi doesn't survive, albeit maybe all the way up to the next general election. But there'll certainly be those discussions behind the scenes.
I mean, but the reality is that there doesn't even appear to be any decent opposition because Starmer is really failing to excite people. It doesn't matter how much people want to say, oh, Labour did so well. But the fact is, most people are deeply turned off by Starmer. They don't see him as decent opposition.
Well, and it's the point I often make is that it's a really sad situation at the moment is we're not having a positive vote for somebody. We're having a sort of negative vote. Which
exactly.
Say, well,
we vote for the least worst, don't we, Andrew? It's an awful situation. Yes. Awful.
I think you and I should both run. I think we'll conquer the world. I love our Friday sessions. It's going to be good. But that's the reality, isn't it? And what a sad state of the world it is that we're having to basically choose between people we don't really want. And that's not good, is it? It's a negative vote, not a positive vote. And I really want, as I say, about society as a whole, I want us to get to the sort of position where we're voting for something positive as opposed to something negative.
You were very forthright and I thought very fair regarding Rwanda when we talked last week about it. And the Home Office has now forecast that 3/4 of Rwanda removals will be halted because of successful legal challenges, which of course we've been seeing. What are your thoughts?
Well, yesterday the Home Office confirmed 711. 711. It's always these numbers, isn't it? Last week I was telling you 6,667.
Well, I think numbers are always very curious, Andrew. I think they're extremely symbolic. But another story, another time. Yeah.
Well, 711 is another symbolic number, isn't it? It's like that old department store which is always there. Well, 7 to 11, and that's how many small boats reached yesterday, a record this year. And the daily tally is huge. Every day we're getting these horrendous statistics. There's also things about there was a slight strange claim for a win about the Rwanda policy working because some people started turning up in Ireland, and you're seeing about these terrible tents popping up there and so on and so forth. The reality is this, and I always say the focus needs to be on the people traffickers, the evil trade, the gangs who are extorting money off a lot of these people. And I mentioned last time about the brilliant movie, which is up for all sorts of awards, called Io Capitano, which gives the tale from the migrants' point of view about how they're reaching desperate times. They see the streets paved with gold over here, and they come over on the promise. And they have false passports along the way. They're abused, they're blackmailed, some are murdered, and it's absolutely appalling, all because of these horrendous gangs. And I think we need to sort of certainly have a look at that side. But the reality is this, is that what happens is Rwanda is not supposed to be the ultimate destination. The whole point of this policy is to stop people coming. And that's what we need to look at. Is this going to be effective? Are people going to say it's enough of a deterrent that we'll be sent to Rwanda, that we're not going to come in the first place? And therefore, we need to sort of target the gangs and make sure that that happens. But I think I need to see more evidence of that, because record numbers every single day is not good.
No, it isn't. But we do need to bring, obviously, more light, less heat to this situation, because people are being whipped up from all sides, aren't they? People quite naturally feel that they're going to be losing their national identity, that, that they will lose, whatever it is that makes us British. And many people are very aggrieved. And on the other hand, you have people like, for example, protesters stopping the coaches yesterday, taking migrants to the Bibi Stockholm. Bibi Stockholm, of course, floating hotel, supposed to be a solution for dealing with migrants coming in. But is it actually working? Seriously?
Well, the reality is this, and as you rightly say, we always like to shine more light and less heat on the topic, so you look at it and you just work out, look, why is this happening? The real question they wanted to pose is, how much is it costing to house these migrants? And the big headlines used to be, well, we're putting up in all these hotels and it's costing millions every day, which we looked at those sort of statistics. So they think, well, hang about, let's not have them in hotels, let's have them on one of these floating barges, and that's the Bibi Stockholm situation. And all sorts of reports have come out about conditions on board, whether they're really good or really horrible or whatever. The truth will be out there one day. But seeing these people, and they basically rally the community around and say, okay, we're going to stop the coach taking them to Bibi Stockholm. We'll keep them in the hotels or wherever wherever they're staying at the moment, and working on that sort of premise. But it's about converting the mindset, if you like, of the people, because there's a knock-on effect. And the reality is that the people coming over in small boats is actually a tiny percentage of immigration. Immigration is over the millions in terms of that sort of, certainly over 1 million. And the thing is to talk about net migration, how many in, how many out. And we need a certain amount of people in order to function, things like care and so on and so forth. And there have been some wins this week in things like cutting down dependents who come over. The number of visas have gone down. So student visas, for example, if you look at the statistics there, what they were saying is that you can get a student visa, come over, be educated here, but you can't bring an extended family. And they're starting to see some sort of progress there. So we need to look at the wider picture rather than just focusing on one aspect of it. And the wider picture, we need migration in order to function as a society, because of certain jobs require that, things like the NHS and things I say, care and so on and so forth. But we also need to make sure that those come legally. And so it's cutting off the illegal side and making sure that those are dealt with respect and with fairness, but with the community understanding as a whole why it's important. We need to know who these people are, what they're doing, and on what basis they come to this country. But there are legal routes and proper legal routes to do that. And we need to make sure those legal routes are encouraged and emphasized rather than sort of going through the illegal routes, which we do need to stop.
Do you think that these are really the things that British people truly care about? And the reason I ask that is because I talk to people everywhere I can, supermarket queues, waiting at the cash point machine, you name it, right? And I'm always interested to find out what interests people and what concerns people. And honestly, the vast majority of people are interested in cost of living, the fact that we have been absolutely let down by sort of our energy providers, how government aren't supporting us, that about taxation, about the fact that, you know, renting properties is beyond the reach of many, many people, much less buying them. These are the things that people seem to be concerned about. And I'm not sure that any of our politicians are ultimately properly addressing them.
Well, you make a brilliant point, as always, and that's what I love coming on this show, because you get right to the core of the issue, and that's absolutely right. But actually, I would go a bit further than that. I would say everything is interrelated. Obviously, the more people you have here, the more demand there are on those services. Obviously, the more tricky it is for others to get. So access to NHS, which is a postcode lottery. Where I am in the heart of London, I'm very lucky. We have a brilliant service, and we can do that. But there are parts of the country where people are waiting for a very, very long time. And the reality is, part of this, they're all interconnected. If you don't deal with immigration, you don't deal with the waiting lists and so on and so forth, there will be issues. But the other thing we should be doing is embracing technology. And as you know, Sonia, I speak around the world as a futurist, back to the futurist. And I talk about the power of artificial intelligence, for example, and how you can basically make more efficiencies. So it's not just about money, but it's about efficiencies. And understanding how technology can help us is a tremendous way forward. And I always say that it's basically our greatest human achievement, AI, but also potentially our biggest existential threat. And it comes from understanding what can we do with the technology. I'll give you an example. In the University of California, they said that chatting to ChatGPT was basically more effective and more empathetic than chatting to your GP, because it had more time, it had more answers, and so on and so forth. And therefore, people could work on that sort of basis. So we should look at that sort of stuff. We should empower people with technology and make sure there are those appropriate resources. But as I say, all of them are interconnected. That's what we need to understand. Understand the bigger picture. It's part of a jigsaw puzzle. Each piece is relevant.
Andrew, what a terrible statement of our society that people feel they get more compassion, understanding, and empathy from AI than they do their own doctors. This is so
it's absolutely right, Sonia. But well, I understand that, but also you're having the rise of things like AI girlfriends and so on and so forth, and companionship. AI is going to be massive. When we had Elon Musk over here at the safety summit, the AI safety summit, the first time ever, and I say the UK punches way above its weight on AI. We were talking about that sort of stuff. He said, look, for companionship, it's going to be massive, because the AI bot will know more about you than your mother, because you're feeding all this information so it can work out language patterns and so on and so forth. So it's going to be really powerful as to how it sells to you and other things. So that's what we should be aware of. I always say that the new currency is data. And data, the more we find out about people, the easier it is to manipulate those minds and hearts, if you like. The hearts and minds of the people is all about data. And AI is playing a massive part. And as I say, I speak on many different platforms, more platforms than Paddington, on the basis about how AI can have a massive influence on elections. And we've looked about not just about deep fakes, but also about these robo voices, the robocalls that we had in New York, where basically the mayor there could speak in many different languages. And actually he couldn't, but there was an AI bot that helped him do that. Similar thing in India with the ruling party there. One of the candidates used this AI bot to make these robocalls and could speak in many different dialects. And the reality is he couldn't, but this basic machine could make him do that. So we need to question everything. It's going back to the basic understanding what the technology does, but also be aware of the massive risks, and that what we see and what we hear, seeing is no longer believing. And I say, they say the camera never lies. Well, that's the biggest lie of all, because perception is deception, and we've seen a lot of that as well.
Do you realise you've just described AI like a narcissist? And I speak as somebody who studied psychology. And the reason I say that is because basically a narcissist obviously feeds off of what the person is and sort of love bombs them, gives them what they want, and then turns on them. Is AI going to turn on us?
Well, I think what you have to, there's a real risk. And we've talked about this, and they talked about it in war and weapons and so on and so forth. You need to absolutely make sure there's some sort of human stop, if you like, to make sure that we're not going down that particular route. But there is a risk. There is an absolute risk. But the risk is if we put our head in the sand and pretend it's not there. And as I say, I work with many different companies going and explaining the technology so that they are prepared to enhance it and embrace the advantages, but be aware of the risks. Because if you don't understand how it works and what the potential is, then there's a real danger that you will fall behind. But you're right, it is like a narcissist. And if you're not careful, it's got all that information. What's it going to do with that information? Because information is power.
Oh, it is indeed. Andrew Eborn, you've been brilliant today as ever, everybody. Andrew Eborn, political commentator and a futurist. Absolutely he is. Andrew, have a tremendous weekend. We will, of course, be right back after the top of the hour. Take good care of yourself, Andrew. Lovely to see you again. Isn't he lovely and smiley? We love that on a Friday. Right, we'll be right back after the 9 o'clock news. Do not go anywhere. See you shortly.